Think about your own life and the quiet security you enjoy within your community. That security is anchored by a foundational promise, the social contract. We consent to laws, pay taxes, and in return, the state guarantees our safety and our rights. But this arrangement relies on an unspoken structural truth. For a contract to exist, it must have a perimeter. There must be an inside and an outside. Today, we look at the edge of the state, the border contract.
It is the ultimate paradox of democratic governance. A constitutional state derives its moral legitimacy entirely from the consent of the governed. Yet, at its perimeter, that same state routinely deploys coercive power against non-citizens who never had a voice in its laws and never consented to its authority.
We must understand that a contract without a boundary is an illusion. Thomas Hobbes reminded us that the natural state of humanity, left unchecked, is a condition of absolute insecurity. The very purpose of the sovereign is to construct a zone of internal peace. But that peace cannot survive if the perimeter is porous. By establishing a clear Westphalian boundary, the state pushes the chaotic state of nature outward, shielding its people from external volatility.
Right, and John Locke grounded this in property. He argued that when individuals form a commonwealth, they pool their land under a single jurisdiction. The national border is simply the collective outer edge of the citizens' private estates. Therefore, regulating entry isn't an act of arbitrary malice. It is the basic exercise of a community's shared property rights.
That property logic, however, obscures a much more complicated evolution. For centuries, human movement across the globe was relatively fluid. The hard, bureaucratic border we know today is actually a modern invention, solidifying largely after the First World War.
The introduction of the mandatory passport system.
Exactly. When modern nation-states institutionalized the passport, they transformed the border from a simple geographic marker into a complex administrative filter. Political theorists like Michael Walzer have argued that a community must control its admission to preserve its unique democratic character. But we have to recognize the systemic cost. By formalizing absolute control over who belongs, the modern state simultaneously invented the concept of a stateless person, individuals entirely stripped of legal protection, left outside the contract everywhere.
Fund the infrastructure, serve in the institutions, and uphold the laws. Therefore, the state has a primary, non-negotiable obligation to prioritize their security and economic stability. If a community cannot choose who enters its house, it ceases to be a self-governing people.
I recognize the value of self-determination, General, but we must look at the moral arbitrariness of the arrangement. No human being chooses where they are born. To declare that a person born on one side of a line deserves absolute security, while someone born a mile away deserves none, challenges the very universal rights our societies claim to champion. If our ethics stop precisely at a legal line on a map, then the contract isn't just an instrument of protection, it is an architecture of exclusion.
This profound friction reveals that we are not simply debating policy. We are clashing over the scale of human obligation. On one side stands the bounded domain, a philosophy of particular duties, which holds that democracy requires distinct orders to preserve internal trust and the rule of law. On the other side stands the open domain, a cosmopolitan framework grounded in universal human mobility, which views closed borders as a perpetuation of geographic luck. The gate of admission is where these two irreconcilable moral frameworks collide.
This collision became highly visible during the mid-20th century. Following the devastation of the Second World War, the international community attempted a delicate compromise with the 1951 Refugee Convention.
The agreement allowed states to retain their sovereign right to control general migration, while carving out a specific legal exception for individuals fleeing targeted persecution. It was an orderly framework designed to balance state stability with basic human decency.
Yet that very compromise exposes the tension. The convention created a universal human right to seek asylum, but it left the enforcement of that right entirely up to sovereign states. When global displacement rises, we see states implement externalized barriers to prevent individuals from ever reaching their soil to claim that right. The historical lesson is clear. International moral ideals are precarious when they depend on a domestic contract that prioritizes its own members.
To fully understand this dynamic, we can look through three distinct conceptual metaphors. The first is the hearth. This view sees the border as the solid walls of a home, built to preserve the warmth, shared values, and resources of the family inside. The second is the filter, a semi-permeable membrane engineered by the modern state to seamlessly welcome capital, goods, and specialized labor, while aggressively turning back those deemed a risk or a burden. The third is the mirror. The harsher, more fortified the border becomes, the more accurately it reflects the profound economic inequality between the stability inside the social contract and the volatility outside of it. Every society chooses which metaphor it prioritizes, and every choice extracts a deep moral or structural cost. Ultimately, this debate persists because both frameworks are trying to protect essential aspects of human flourishing. The bounded framework recognizes that stable institutions and social trust require structure and definition. The universal framework recognizes that human dignity does not change when an individual crosses a geographic coordinate.
We find ourselves operating in a state of deep intellectual humility. The tension within the border contract cannot be easily solved by a simple slogan. It forces us to confront a heavy reality. The order we cherish inside our society is structurally maintained by the exclusion we enforce at its gates. The border contract asks us to look directly at the perimeter of our civilization and question the scope of our responsibility. Are we protecting a hearth? Are we managing a filter? Or are we ignoring what is reflected in the mirror? How a society answers these questions doesn't just manage the movement of people. It reveals the true moral boundaries of the social contract itself. Thank you for joining us on the Vantage Point. Until next time.